The upscale restaurant was silent, until a piercing cry shattered the calm. Heads turned, silverware clinked to a halt, and whispers filled the air. At the center of it all sat a billionaire, known for his power, influence, and unshakable control. Yet today, all that control was slipping away. His infant son screamed relentlessly, red-faced and inconsolable. Waiters scrambled with warm bottles. The manager offered a private room, and even the billionaire's assistant jingled an expensive toy. Nothing worked. The louder the baby cried, the more irritated the guests became, rolling eyes, shaking heads, muttering about entitled people who can't handle their own kids. Not far away, a waitress stood frozen, tray in hand. Her name was Danielle Carter, a single mother barely holding her life together. And sitting quietly in the corner was her daughter, Naomi, a bright-eyed black girl no older than 10. Naomi watched as the baby's cries echoed through the room. She looked at her mother, then back at the child, and without a second thought, she walked straight toward the table everyone else avoided. Gasps filled the room. The billionaire's bodyguard stepped forward instantly, ready to stop her. But the billionaire himself raised a hand. Something about Naomi's calm eyes made him pause. For a heartbeat, two worlds collided. The billionaire, wrapped in wealth and influence, and a little girl in scuffed sneakers, armed only with courage. No one knew what she would do next. But within minutes, this child would silence the entire room and leave the billionaire shaken in a way no fortune ever had. The billionaire was Richard Ellington, a man whose very name commanded respect across boardrooms and stock markets. He wasn't just rich, he was powerful. The kind of man who shaped economies and swayed governments. People envied him, feared him, and bowed to him. But on this night, under the crystal chandeliers of the most prestigious restaurant in town, Richard wasn't a titan of industry. He was just a father, failing to calm his screaming child. His son, Henry, only 8 months old, had been restless all evening. Richard had insisted on bringing him along, part pride, part stubbornness, but now he regretted it. No deal, no meeting. No billion-dollar empire could prepare him for the helplessness of parenthood. Meanwhile, Danielle Carter was juggling her own battles. She had picked up an extra shift after her coworker called out sick. Bills were piling up and every dollar mattered. She couldn't afford childcare, so her daughter Naomi had come along. Danielle hated exposing her child to the exhausting world of long hours and demanding customers, but Naomi never complained. She was mature beyond her years, sitting quietly in a corner booth with her sketchbook, waiting patiently for her mom. But Naomi wasn't as invisible as she seemed. She noticed things others ignored. And when she saw the billionaire's baby wailing uncontrollably, she didn't see status or wealth, she saw a baby in pain. Her heart tugged. "Mama," Naomi whispered, tugging Danielle's sleeve as she hurried by with a tray. "That baby's really sad." Danielle glanced over, her face tight with exhaustion. "I know, sweetie, but that's not our business. Stay put, okay?" But Naomi couldn't sit still. She closed her sketchbook, slid off the booth, and began walking toward the crying child. The restaurant froze. Expensively dressed couples, businessmen in tailored suits, and servers balancing silver trays all turned to watch this little black girl approach the most powerful man in the room. The billionaire's bodyguards immediately moved to block her. "Sir, she shouldn't." Richard raised a hand. "Let her through." The girl stopped at the edge of the table, looking at Henry with gentle eyes. The baby's cries softened almost instantly, his fists unclenching as he stared at her. The entire room went silent. Danielle spun around, horrified. "Naomi!" she hissed, rushing forward. But by then it was too late. The baby was already reaching for her daughter. Henry quieted in Naomi's presence, his cries fading into tiny hiccups. His little hands reached for her braids, tugging gently as he gazed up at her. Naomi giggled softly. "Shh, it's okay, baby. You're safe now." The room collectively exhaled, though not everyone was pleased. From a nearby table, a wealthy woman scoffed. "Really? Letting a waitress's child handle the billionaire's baby? Where's the nanny?" Her words dripped with disgust, and several diners smirked or nodded in agreement. Danielle's face flushed with shame. She wanted to grab Naomi and apologize, to avoid humiliation. But before she could move, Richard shot the woman a glare so sharp it silenced her instantly. Still, whispers rippled through the room. Phones discreetly lifted, capturing photos and videos. The scene was too unusual, too striking. The billionaire's crying baby soothed not by wealth, not by professionals, but by a poor black girl in worn-out sneakers. One of the bodyguards leaned down. "Sir, with all due respect, this doesn't look proper. People are recording." Richard's jaw tightened. He knew what this could mean: headlines, scrutiny, endless public debate. But when he looked at Henry, calm for the first time in hours, he couldn't bring himself to push Naomi away. Then another diner muttered, loud enough for all to hear, "Imagine that. All the money in the world, and his kid has to be saved by a waitress's brat." Laughter followed, cruel and sharp. Danielle's chest ached. She'd endured years of subtle discrimination, but hearing strangers mock her daughter was unbearable. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "Naomi, sweetie, come back here." But Naomi shook her head, holding Henry's tiny hand. "Mama, he needs me." The words hung in the air, simple yet powerful. "Richard?" Ellington felt the sting of judgment pressing against him from every direction. The wealthy diners expected him to dismiss the girl, to protect his reputation. But deep inside, he knew this moment was bigger than his image. It was about truth, dignity, and the innocence of a child who saw no class, no status, only a baby in need. The conflict was clear: image versus humanity, pride versus truth. And Richard was about to make a choice no one expected. For a long moment, Richard Ellington sat frozen. His son nestled calmly against the little girl who had done what no one else could. The restaurant, normally a haven of quiet sophistication, had become a stage for something far more raw and human. Every diner held their breath, waiting to see what the billionaire would do. The cameras from discreetly raised phones glinted in the soft light, each one hungry for a scandal. Richard could almost hear the headlines. "Billionaire loses control. Waitress's daughter steps in." His world had always been measured in power, perception, and control. But here, in the soft laughter of his baby reaching for Naomi's braids, he realized control was an illusion. Danielle finally reached the table, her hands trembling as she tried to pull her daughter back. "I'm so sorry, sir," she whispered, mortified. "She shouldn't have bothered you." But Richard lifted a hand, his voice calm yet commanding. "Don't." The entire restaurant stilled. Even Danielle froze, her apology dying in her throat. Richard leaned forward, his gaze shifting from Danielle to Naomi. "Your daughter just did what no nanny, no assistant, and no amount of money could do. She gave my son peace." Naomi looked up shyly, hugging Henry closer as if she were protecting him. "He was just scared," she said softly. "Sometimes babies don't need toys. They just need someone to feel safe with." Her words, innocent yet profound, struck Richard harder than any boardroom negotiation ever had. He could feel the eyes of the wealthy crowd on him, judging, waiting, expecting him to push this child away, to reassert the invisible lines between their worlds. But Richard was done performing. He stood slowly, towering yet strangely vulnerable, and reached for his son. Henry whimpered as he moved, only to relax again when Richard, hesitantly, allowed Naomi to stay by his side. The room gasped as the billionaire, always untouchable, always above, bent slightly toward the little girl. "Thank you," he said, his voice low but resolute. "You reminded me of something I'd forgotten." The whispers in the room turned sharp. Some diners scoffed, others looked away. But one thing was undeniable. Richard had chosen a side, and it wasn't theirs. A man in a tailored suit muttered under his breath, "He's humiliating himself." Richard heard him, and for the first time in his life, he didn't care. He turned to Danielle. "What's your name?" Danielle Carter," she stammered, bracing herself for anger or dismissal. Instead, Richard nodded. "You've raised an extraordinary daughter." His gaze lingered on Naomi, who smiled nervously, still holding Henry's tiny hand.
"She has something money can't buy, heart."
The diners shifted uncomfortably. They had come expecting exclusivity, luxury, and distance from ordinary people. Instead, they were witnessing the richest man in the room humbling himself before a waitress's child. And then, in a move no one expected, Richard turned toward the manager. "Cancel my private dining room. We'll stay right here. And bring another chair for my son's new friend." The room erupted in murmurs. Phones flashed brighter now, desperate to capture this moment. But Richard didn't care. For the first time in years, he felt free. Free from the suffocating expectations of image and power. Danielle's eyes brimmed with tears, torn between pride and disbelief. Naomi, oblivious to the chaos, simply rocked Henry gently, whispering, "See, you're okay now." And as the billionaire sat back down, allowing the little girl to keep soothing his son while the entire restaurant looked on in shock. One truth became clear. Power had shifted. Not to money, not to status, but to a child's unshakable innocence and courage. For the first time all evening, the restaurant no longer buzzed with irritation but with a stunned kind of silence. Naomi sat proudly in the extra chair brought to the table. Henry nestled comfortably against her small shoulder. His tiny fingers clutched at her dress, his soft breath steady and calm. Danielle stood beside them, torn between pride and disbelief. She had always known her daughter was special, gentle, wise beyond her years, filled with a compassion that outshone hardship. But she never imagined that one night, in a room full of millionaires and critics, Naomi's heart would shine brighter than any chandelier. Richard Ellington leaned back in his chair, his sharp, calculating gaze softer now. For decades, he had defined his life by acquisitions, mergers, and public image. Everything was about strategy and winning. But tonight, watching his son choose comfort in the arms of a waitress's child, he realized something money had blinded him to. Humanity cannot be bought, only given. "I've been to the most expensive hospitals," Richard said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "Hired the best specialists, surrounded myself with every luxury, but none of that mattered tonight. What mattered," he glanced at Naomi, "was kindness." Danielle swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "She's just a child, sir. She doesn't see the world the way we do. She only sees people." "And maybe," Richard replied, "that's what the world needs more of." The diners who had once whispered in judgment now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some lowered their phones, ashamed of having treated the moment like a spectacle. Others simply stared, realizing they had witnessed something they could not explain, away with money or status. Naomi looked up at Richard innocently. "He just needed someone to hold him," she said. "Babies don't care if you're rich or not." Richard chuckled softly, his stern face breaking into something rare, a genuine smile. "You're absolutely right." The weight of the moment lingered in the air, heavy and transformative. Danielle finally reached for her daughter. "Come on, Naomi, we've already taken up too much of his time." But Richard stopped her. "No, you haven't. If anything, you've given me something invaluable tonight." He paused, looking directly into Danielle's eyes. "You've reminded me what matters most." The restaurant staff stood frozen, waiting for instruction. The manager, nervous and sweating, tried to bow. "Mr. Ellington, if you'd prefer, we can clear a private room now." Richard shook his head firmly. "No, my son is happy here, and I'm staying right here with the people who made that possible." Gasps rippled again, but this time, there was no mockery, only stunned disbelief. For the rest of the evening, Naomi sat by Henry, feeding him little bites of bread under Danielle's watchful eye. Richard surprisingly asked Danielle about her life, her work, her struggles, her dreams for her daughter. No one had ever asked her those things in this place, not like this. By the time dessert was served, the once icy atmosphere of the restaurant had shifted. Guests who had scoffed earlier now offered small smiles. The invisible line between them and him had blurred, if only for a moment. When it was time to leave, Richard stood, his son cradled in one arm and his gaze steady on Danielle and Naomi. "The world judged you tonight," he said quietly, "but they were wrong. You gave my son peace when no one else could. I won't forget that." Danielle blinked back tears, unable to find words. Naomi, fearless as always, grinned. "Bye, baby Henry," she said, waving at the child in his father's arms. Henry cooed in response, as if he understood. Richard turned to the room one last time, his voice carrying authority. "Tonight I was reminded of something simple. Dignity doesn't come from wealth, it comes from humanity. And never," his gaze swept across the diners who had sneered at Naomi earlier, "never judge someone by the clothes they wear or the job they work. Because tonight, the richest person in this room was a little girl with nothing but love to give." With that, he walked out, his son nestled peacefully against him. Leaving the restaurant stunned into silence, Danielle pulled Naomi close, her heart bursting with pride. She whispered, "You changed something tonight, baby girl." And Naomi, in her childlike innocence, only smiled. "I just wanted to help." That night, the billionaire had learned a lesson no amount of fortune could buy. Compassion is the greatest wealth of all.